Representative Whalen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I do have an amendment, the DE3, that I would like to offer.
Okay.
Just gets the bill in the shape I'd like.
Okay, House Bill 2882, the DE3. 2682. Is that what? Okay. That's the House file. Got it right. Okay. Do you want to describe what your amendment is all about?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So originally, my bill was a simple repeal of the RCAC, and then it would have put us back to the way we previously elected regent candidates. The DE is in a response to many conversations that I've had with members on this committee and others that suggest we want to go in a direction that would, rather than just bring us back to what we used to do, give us something new to help us elect regent candidates. And so it's very similar to some of the other proposals we've heard and that we're discussing. It would appoint 4 members from the House and Senate Higher Education Committees, so an 8-member committee altogether, with equal representation from each party to vet candidates for the at-large positions. And then it would also establish a more formal process for each congressional legislative delegation to submit their recommendations for regent candidates that would serve in each district.
Any question on the amendment? If not, we need a motion to approve the DE3 amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The amendment is adopted. Discussion? Anything further? You have someone to testify as well?
I do, Mr. Chair. I did have just a few comments, and then I'll have my testifier come up, if that's all right with the committee.
Sure.
I have, as I mentioned, I've had some great conversations with folks, and I think that overall, I appreciate that there seems to be consensus for reform of the way we elect regents. There is in your packet some information that we received recently from the House Research on the regent selection process and the reason that we established the RCAC to begin with. Just to remind everyone, the independent study group at that time in 1986 noted that it seemed political partisanship was the main qualification for regents, hence the RCAC. However, I find it very interesting that the way that the RCAC was established actually has perpetuated this, because the RCAC itself has membership that can be inherently partisan. You have 24 members, 12 appointed from the House, 12 appointed from the Senate, and there could be no more than 8 from either that are a part of one political party. So if one party controls both houses, you could end up having 16 members of a 24-member RCAC from one political party. That's inherently partisan. Now, most of the proposals we're hearing in my proposal today actually would be an even split of both parties, which would actually, I believe, remove the partisanship that we are seeing. So with that, I would like to invite Darren Rocha up to share on his perspective on this proposal and others, and then open it up for conversation. I'm also happy to answer questions, Mr.
Regent
Chair.
Rocha. Afternoon. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Darren Rocha, Independence, Minnesota. Currently serve as the 3rd District Regent on the University of Minnesota Board of Regents, and I'm joined by my colleague from the distinguished 4th District, Regent Beeson is over here, I think. I think we're the only 2 in the room. Shall I have at it, Mr. Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
All right, thank you. I've already laid out quite a bit to you in previous conversations. I've had a chance to look at the various bills, and there's obviously activity going on at the Senate side as well. So I appreciate Representative Whelan's giving me an opportunity to address this a bit. I think that as I've looked at all of the various proposals that have come forward, I think all of them move us in the right direction as a state in the election of regents. I think they all are better than the current process, particularly because they put they move the interaction to the legislature at an earlier phase, at least for most of the seats. With respect to the congressional district activity, as I think I've mentioned in the past, one of the things that I like about that is the more touch points you create between legislators and regents, I think the more accountability you will have from the regents to the legislature and more of a familiarity to ensure that the university, which is an extremely important public institution, is serving people the best that it can. When I first heard of the proposal for a balanced panel, it struck me as novel. guess I had sort of considered that in the effort to seek to minimize the partisanship in the selection of regents, which I think has always been there. I haven't necessarily seen it manifest itself clearly on the board as a clear delineation between regents. But in the selection process and the appearance of partisanship, which I think has an impact on the public's trust in what the regents represent, the idea of a split panel is really interesting to me. I think that it's I previously considered that elections have consequences and therefore the majority party will control these types of selections, but sometimes those consequences lead to unnecessary issues, such as a board being seen less as a benevolent governance entity and more as a partisan creation. I don't think that's entirely eliminated because you still have phases to go through where some partisanship can have an impact, as I think you discussed momentarily ago. But then if most legislators support the wisdom of their colleagues and the work of their panel, the result will be better than current practice, and let me explain just a little bit. A full repeal is good, but obviously you've got to replace it with something. I think these proposals take you there. In considering I think the points that Representative Schultz is seeking, particularly as it relates to gender balance, I would actually say that certainly there are other constituencies that are concerned about other kinds of balance as well, not just gender, but that obviously we can see is a significant concern, and the board right now does not reflect as she directed the state community and the university community. I do think that a balanced panel of legislators rather, I think is an effective way of trying to get to that issue, because I certainly think that when you have a lot of independent decisions being made, you can end up with results. I mean, everybody might pick, 52-year-old white male dentists, and that's the entire board if everyone's making their independent choices. Whereas if the panel is making this consideration for its recommendations, they can certainly take these things into consideration, particularly if they've had good feedback from the alumni associations and others as to what the board looks like and what it should look like. The benefits of a panel, I think a balanced approach means a panel will really need to focus on the attributes of candidates to gain support of both parties' members. There will be compromise, I think, inherently, especially for the at-large positions. And this will make outliers less likely and will require support from both parties for every nominee. It also has the risk is if the university board gets way out of sync with what the majority thinks, you could have situations where you try to suspend the rules and kind of put more dedicated regents in place. But I think that's somewhat remote. But this is a process that all legislators, I think, can respect, especially because you know that while you may not be in the majority today, you may be in the majority tomorrow and vice versa. So to the extent that everybody sort of takes into account the university as such a critical entity, that we want to try to elevate that dialogue and hopefully come to good results that way. The process is transparent. The motivations of legislative panel members are known. The current process, throughout the RCAC experiment, one of the challenges is that there are relationships between people on the council and the university and other relationships. Those aren't revealed to the legislature when you receive some recommendation from them. And so, at least with the legislative folks, you have relationships with your colleagues and your constituents, and that's where your accountability lies. And I think that's going to have an impact on the communication you have with candidates and the vetting that you do of candidates to ensure that they're coming in for a proper public purpose. Very importantly, one of the things that's really attractive about the models that you're currently discussing is it's a single campaign. Imagine you in your legislative lives having to go to some other part of the state and meet with people who don't live in your district to get an endorsement and then have to go back and run in your district. That's kind of what happens here when you have the RCAC panel not actually conducting the election. So you have one campaign to those folks, and then a very different one when you're talking to members of the legislature and the things that legislators are really concerned about, in particularly how the university is accountable with state resources, how it provides access to your constituents, and so on. It builds much more like an endorsement into a primary, into a general election, and I think I can tell you as a candidate who's been through this process 3 times, that is a much more attractive process than having to meet the perspectives of different groups in that way. I also think that a legislative panel approach creates a great opportunity, a relationship for the board and the legislature. Assuming that there are qualified legislators who are interested in serving in this way, they will gain an expertise in University of Minnesota governance and also understanding the issues of autonomy, and the benefits flow both ways. When the legislature has a concern, the bipartisan committee will be informed and invested and can speak to the board, and likewise when the university has concerns, members of the bipartisan panel with the leadership of both chambers in higher ed will be able to work with the board somewhat as partners, I think. There are other ancillary advantages, but the biggest thing is the balanced legislative panel will be supported by LCC, and the panel will be able to take input from constituencies, the Alumni Association and others. The same publication and recruitment will occur as occurs now. And they'll be able to inform the public that these seats are open. And also people who are currently involved in the RCAC process as council members will obviously have the ability to recruit candidates, vet candidates, and promote candidates and support them at the legislative panel. In short, nothing is lost. In fact, you just end up with a much better relationship, a much clearer process between the legislature and members of and candidates for the Board of Regents, which I think would certainly make the process more streamlined, and I think would produce great results of accountable regents. And subject to your questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for your testimony. Members have questions? Representative Salowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Regent Rocha, the Office of Legislative Auditor issued a report on the Regent Candidate Advisory Council in 2015. Can you share with the committee, because it did deal with incidents that had occurred in your selection process, what the review of the legislative auditor was of the process?
Regent Rocha.
Mr. Chair, Representative Pulaski, sure. By way of a bit of background, it is one of the things that for me has reflected the disconnect between the original intent of the RCAC experiment and what it ultimately has turned into, whereby the vetting process, which is so highly subjective, and I think I walked you all through it last time I was in front of you, it's so subjective as to be, I think oftentimes used as a tool to advantage some candidates over others. In this particular instance, the RCAC, advisory is in the name. It doesn't have the power to select regents. It has the authority to advise the legislature on candidates for the position, and we can talk about whether they were supposed to be giving a full range of 4 candidates or whether it was to be, more of a puppetry to determine how people were elected. But in 15, when I made the application, and I mean it's a kind of a long story, and our time's somewhat limited here. I was not interviewed, somewhat as a surprise to me, and I've already mentioned that to you. And another candidate who is eminently qualified was not recommended. Both he and I, without coordinating or knowing the other was doing it, we both thought that was inappropriate, and we both pursued, continued to pursue service on the board. And the 3rd District legislators met, as tradition provided, with the rules of that same process, and I was endorsed by the 3rd District. And a couple members of the sitting RCAC, and the quote was, "We have to stop this," because they were not about to allow someone who was not their selectee prevail in the election to be a member of the Board of Regents. At that point, they acquired a list of former regents. They went back and pulled my file, which under the data practices was supposed to be sealed because I was not interviewed. They pulled that out. They emailed that out to a bunch of people with the private data on there, including that of my references and so on. And I started getting these panicked phone calls from people saying, "I thought you said that I wouldn't get a call because you were not being interviewed." And I said, "Well, apparently some people have taken it upon themselves to modify the rules or the statute for RCAC, and they've started this collateral attack." The feedback that I was getting is that there were no questions asking for anything positive. I think I might have mentioned to you already that one of the former regents with whom I served said that it was, quote, "hatchet job." Another person was so uncomfortable by the questions that she started taping the conversation, and this is a highly successful professional in this community. So the auspice was this was supposed to be a background check on me to somehow aid the legislature in determining whether I was an appropriate candidate, even though RCAC would have had the opportunity to do the same thing had they conducted an interview, and I would have had an opportunity to present my case for my candidacy. As a result of that, I contacted one of the people making the call, and I just said, I want to make very clear that you don't have my authorization to use my data. I don't know where this, I called the LCC, and they had not provided approval. It had not been cleared with the chair. It just simply reflected that some members of the RCAC were so adamant about being able to control regent selection that they were willing to walk through the statute and my rights to try to affect that change, or try to prevent me from being elected. And again, so my expectation is this is one of the clear reasons why the experiment to try to have that input has really, I think, turned into some folks, believing that they have control of a regent selection process that has for 160 years been vested in members of the legislature to exercise their discretion in who should be governing the University of Minnesota Board.
Representative Pawlowski, any further follow-up? Okay. Members, any other questions of the testifier or of the author? Representative Albright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Regent Rocha, I've also looked at the OLA report, and while it certainly is unsettling, particularly in light of the process that you underwent, I don't see in here where there is a proclivity that this is an ongoing practice of the RCAC, and I'm just wondering if you'd be willing to comment that, if you have any response to that comment.
Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Albright. A lot of folks have served in RCAC over the years, and the overwhelming majority are amazing people with amazing careers in public service, and all of them are there for the right reason. I have no reason to believe that that is an ongoing process. There was a disappointment for me because I do know that a couple of legislators, different parties, different chambers, raised the question about whether the people that had acted that way should remain on the council. And I think there's a pretty good argument if I'm on that council saying, well, if somebody has been found to have fallen outside the rubric, maybe that's not the best place for them to be. But as near as I can tell, the determination was that that was fine, and they continued to serve on it, which for me was really uncomfortable because then 2 years later, when that unexpired term concluded, I then had to choose as to whether I should sit myself in front of the same council that had, in my view, not treated my desire to serve my state and my university very well. So I don't believe that that is a continuing process. But I would point out, and as I talked about in the last time I believe when I presented here, there is not a consistent way of conducting background checks. And from my perspective, when you're talking about folks that are running for the Board of Regents and their level of accomplishment and so on, these aren't entry-level folks. These are people with reputations and careers, and a lot of it's very publicly known. The idea that different people can conduct different background checks, and in the case where the OLA report, the people that decided that they would conduct background checks on me had already expressed publicly that they opposed my candidacy. So what's the likelihood of that being a nice, unbiased, and objective evaluation of what I bring to the table? It's still a problem in that there isn't a consistency. You have different people that are doing background checks on people for the same office. Some may be supportive of a candidate, some may be in opposition. It's not a very good process for having that kind of clarity. But for me, I don't think, to me, I don't even get to that issue. To me, I get to the issue of the people that we as a board are accountable to are the people of the state through their elected representatives, and that's you folks.
Representative Albright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to the author of this bill, then, Representative Whalen, how would, in response to what we've just heard from Regent Rocha, would your bill rectify that situation?
Representative Whalen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Albright. I'm not sure I understand the question. How would my bill rectify the situation that we find with the RCAC? Can you rephrase the question for me?
Mr. Chair.
Representative Albright.
Representative Whalen, it would seem that there is a preponderance of discussion surrounding the use and or the misuse of the reference checks, and who's doing those, who's not doing those, at the discretion of whom or not. And so I'm wondering how you rectify the standardization without weaponization of the reference check process under your bill.
Representative Whalen.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Albright, for clarifying the question and stating it in that way. I am not 100% positive that the bill that is before you, the DE, specifically addresses the background checks, although I believe we direct the LCC to provide administrative support and services. Yes, subdivision 3, lines 2.4 to 2.5. So in my view, the Legislative Coordinating Commission would help with that process. Now, I'm very open to amendments that we can add to this or other language that would ensure data privacy for the candidates that are undergoing this process, if that's something that we need to look at.
Okay, any other, Representative Schultz, question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Why only recommend one candidate for the at-large seats?
Representative Whalen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Schultz. I am looking for that line in
2.2.
the bill. Thank you. The joint session. I believe that's the way that the current process is. So the joint subcommittee, the Higher Education Joint Subcommittee, recommends one candidate to the Joint Legislative Committee. And as we've heard from nonpartisan research already, in times when there's been trouble getting to that, we sometimes have suspended the rules. I know we've recommended 2 in the past. So I just figured that process seems to have worked, and people can still nominate from the floor, which I also believe is a good process. So mostly I wanted to work with changing the way that we are, as a joint higher education committee, presenting these candidates to the Joint Legislative Convention. Didn't necessarily want to stop other legislators that don't serve on the higher education committee from that opportunity to present.
Representative Schultz?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess we should think about what makes the most sense. And if there are several qualified candidates and the subcommittee is doing all of this work and vetting the candidates and reviewing them, if I'm not on that subcommittee, but I'm on the general committee, I would like to know if there are other qualified candidates. It would give me more assurance if that person happens to be nominated from the floor, that was one of the maybe 3 candidates that were recommended for one at-large seat. So I would recommend revisiting that and see if you'd be amenable to recommending more than one candidate.
Representative Whalen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Schultz. I'm very open to amending that. I would say, in my view, those conversations would come out in the committee process. So you or I or whoever would be able to ask questions of the subcommittee members to say, why this candidate, why not this candidate? And we could have a robust conversation at that time. And then if we decided, so the subcommittee that's recommending candidates can explain their reasons why. The joint committee of the House and Senate Higher Education Committee could recommend different candidates than the subcommittee does based on the conversation that comes out of that hearing.
Any follow-up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is the subcommittee a public committee? Would the public be invited to attend the subcommittee?
Representative Whalen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Schultz. I might have to defer to nonpartisan research on the specifics of how that may or may not be clear in the language, but in my view, it would be public.
Public.
Hopkins?
Mr. Chair, members, yes, this would be a joint committee of the legislature, so its members would be open to its meetings would be open to the public.
All right, anyone else? Anyone in the audience? Thank you, Regent Rocha, for being here and your testimony. House File 2682 then is laid over for possible inclusion in an omnibus bill or for further action if necessary later.